Chairman.
The Honourable Amy Adams.
Mr Chairman, thank you. I am been looking forward to taking a call in this appropriations debate in the justice sector area, and so there's a lot to cover, and I wanted to take a double call, which I'll obviously call for in due course, to cover off some of that. I think the starting place for me is to look at where we're sitting, and then I want to talk a bit about where we want to go and the direction of travel that we've prioritised in this budget. The headline really, sir, is that crime in this country is at a 35-year low. And that really is a tremendous achievement to which a huge amount of credit has to go to everyone who works in the sector. And it's not just government. There's a lot of reasons why that is working well through community levels, but certainly the police and the justice sector agencies, I think, really should be commended for a tremendous deliverable over their work in that space. We have a better public service target 7, looking at crime in this country. And I can tell this House that total crime, we set a target of getting it down 20% by 2017, so we've already reduced total crime by 18%, in fact, and we're well on track to reach our target long before the final target date. Violent crime is down around 10%. That one is harder and slower to move, as you would expect, but nonetheless good progress has been made. And youth crime, sir, we set a target of a 25% reduction, which we then increased to 30% because we've already exceeded it. Youth crime is down 38%, and I do just want to take a moment to commend the tremendous work of the Youth Court in New Zealand and the system that has been developed in New Zealand that has held actually an internationally high regard for the way we work with our young offenders. Because, sir, what we know is that our best chance to stop people becoming clients, if you like, of the justice sector is when they're young. And equally, if they get onto a path of repeated offending as children, then they are the ones who are most likely to be long-term offenders. So if you take the 1970 cohort, population cohort, and you look at all the crime that's committed by that particular cohort, 80% of all crime committed by them is committed by people who had their first conviction before 20. So working well with our young offenders is fundamentally important, and not getting them into that cycle of a conviction and a sentence from which it's that much harder to come back and re-enter society. So in the youth crime space, tremendous work has been done. I want to touch too on one of the initiatives that I remember very well passing in this House, well, being a member of the House that passed when the Honourable Simon Power was in my role, which is the Victim Offenders Levy. Now, this was legislation that imposes a levy of $50 on offenders to help contribute towards providing better services for victims. And at the time, this House, one half of this House completely derided it. It would never work. It was a nonsense. It was, window dressing. What a stupid thing. They'd get rid of it. Well, sir, that has exceeded all collection expectations. We've so far collected $16.5 million, which is entirely set aside for victim support services. Now, because of that, we've been able to provide services that were never previously available to victims, and more than 40,000 victims have had services funded from this government thanks to that one piece of legislation that was completely derided and criticised by the opposition. So one of those, of course, is the 24/7 support service offered to victims by Victim Support, which is funded by us. Ms Dean, in her contribution as chair of the committee, talked in her speech in this section on family violence, and I'm pleased she did, because as Ms Dean noted, this is the area that I have made my number one priority. Now, I did that with some degree of trepidation, because this is a hard area to make a dent in. And if I was a more self-preserving minister, I probably would have picked things that were a little bit easier to deliver on, but like my colleague Hekia Parata, we're here to make a difference on things that matter to New Zealand. We're not here to do the easy stuff, and if this country wants to really get a grip on one of the most egregious, horrific and embarrassing stats in our society, it is family violence. So let me just tell the House a couple of things to highlight how unacceptably high the incidence is. We have the highest rate of reported violence against intimate partners in the OECD. That is not what anyone in this House would accept for a country like New Zealand. We have more than 100,000 notifications to police of family violence incidents in each year. That's one effectively every 5 minutes. Every 5 minutes. So during my call, there'll be at least 2 notifications to police of family violence. What's really scary, though, is the statistic that tells us, on average, A victim of family, Mr.
The
Chair,
Honourable Amy Adams.
on average, a victim of family violence will experience 21 instances of family violence before she, and generally she, not always of course, will pick up the phone to police. So we're getting one call to police every 5 minutes, and yet we know that behind that there is this enormous history of offending that hasn't even registered into the system. Half of our homicides come from family violence. So if we want to make a dent, a continued dent in that hard, sticky area of serious violence, it has to be through family violence. On average, 14 women, 7 men and 8 children every year in this country are murdered by someone they're in a family relationship with, sir, and that cannot be allowed to continue. We have a remarkable stat from my colleague, the Honourable Michael Woodhouse, about police time. Now, there was a discussion in the last call around how we're making better use of police time. Well, 41% of all police response time is responding to family violence. So if we want to have more police out on our streets, keeping us safe, doing the things that we would want, sir, we have to be dealing with this. Now, what I'm encouraged by, the statistics are just mind-numbingly horrific, but what I am encouraged by is that I have not found anyone in this House, in the NGO sector, or anywhere in New Zealand actually, who isn't committed and willing to help try and solve this problem and make it work better. I want to thank members of this House who've worked cooperatively and collaboratively and across party lines with me to think about how we can do this better. Because I will say that I don't believe that this is an area that any government of any colour, political colour, has really got on top of, nor do I think it's one that any government has not tried very hard to do. For years and years, we have had countless reports and initiatives and experts and spending, but the reality is we're not getting cut through. Now, I can't stand here and promise that we will solve that, but I can absolutely stand here and promise this House that while I'm the Minister of Justice, this is going to be what I think about every single day. And in this year's budget, sir, you have seen from us a commitment to ensure that this is right at the heart of our work programme. Now, just yesterday, the Minister of Social Development and I released a stock take of how government has to date worked in this area. And what is interesting to me, sir, is it's the first time that degree of comprehensive all-of-government assessment has been undertaken, and it's certainly something the sector has been calling for a while. We as government, and I use that sense not in the executive sense, but in the public service sense, have to be better integrated in how we deliver our services. It is no good having different agencies looking at this lens through an entirely siloed vertical approach without giving thought to how other agencies are interacting in the space. It is inefficient. It is expensive, and actually, quite frankly, sir, it can be damaging and counterproductive. So Minister Tolley and I undertook a comprehensive stock take, which revealed, quite surprisingly, that we are spending $1.4 billion a year on family violence. $1.4 billion. And yet very little of that is on prevention, very little of it is on screening, almost all of it is on response. Now, easy to look at in the round, but actually trying to re-engineer that work program is going to be quite a piece of work. Sir, later in the coming weeks, you'll see more announcements for us about how we see that work program continuing to develop and evolve. And I can assure this House that, as I say, while I'm in the role, it is something I will continue to focus on. Let me just take the time I have left to touch on a couple of other initiatives, one of which is the process to appoint a Chief Victims Advisor to ensure that the voice of victims remains absolutely at the heart of the development of government policy. Now, sir, we saw what a tremendous advance it was to the quality of policy advice when we appointed for the first time ever a New Zealand's Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor to really ensure that we had very good, high-level scientific analysis at the heart of government. I want that same sort of rigour around ensuring that the victim's perspective is represented at the heart of the policy process, and that's why we're appointing that person. Finally, sir, the Harmful Digital Communications Bill is a piece of legislation that I am incredibly proud of, and that is being talked about now in a number of countries as a model on how to address this. There is still work to do to appoint the approved agencies who will have the core role in educating the community, user groups, and working to resolve disputes. But, sir, this is legislation that affects that harm in the modern environment can be caused in a myriad of different ways. We have to be responsive. We have to be continually reviewing our harm frameworks to ensure we have those settings right. We know that harm in the online world is not only real and pervasive, it is incredibly damaging, and the number of suicides and serious harm cases that have occurred as a result is unacceptable. I'm very proud of it, Mr. Chair.
David Clendon.